Get started. Let's call this meeting to order.
Excellent. Member Bierce?
Here.
Member Larson is absent. Member Lieberman?
Here.
Member Melgen?
Here.
Member Rose Shears?
Here.
And Vice Chair Hodges,
Here.
serving as chair today.
All right. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. City of Albany recognizes that we occupied the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lijon. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. All right. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes.
Any
like to make a
comments or
motion?
questions on the minute?
I have a question. Since I didn't attend, I would abstain, but will that prevent it from passing? Because
We do have
need a quorum.
5, so we only need 4 votes. Or actually, we only need 3 votes for something to pass because we need a majority.
4 out of 7.
Sorry?
Three votes, 4 votes to pass.
4 votes to pass.
It's 4 out of 7 is a majority.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, either way, it'll be fine. Yeah. If you'd rather abstain.
Any motion?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Great. Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
abstain.
Member Melgen?
I missed that meeting as well, but from what I looked at, the minutes look good, so I'll say yes.
Oh, right. Member Rose Shears? Yes. And Vice Chair Hodges?
Yes. All right. Now move to public comment for items that are not on the agenda.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Nick Peterson with the Albany Climate Action Coalition. I'm really encouraging members to put their thinking caps on and come up with some good policies and outreach that can move Albany along on their quest to address the climate crisis that we're up against across the world and of course in Albany. One thing I would suggest is I'm really excited about and I know Michelle's going to present this, the new rebates that will now also include electric heat pump hot water heaters. I think there needs to be a bit more outreach, especially to the low-income residents of Albany, many of which are elderly and don't really connect much with electronic communications. I know when I do deliveries of Meals on Wheels in Albany, I come across elderly homeowners that seem pretty isolated and maybe not that knowledgeable about how they could qualify for quite substantial financial help. So I encourage the city, I know it's a burden on staff to try to do outreach, but maybe partner with someone, some entity like Quit Carbon to at least provide where these locations are and to reach out to them, these residents that do qualify for low income. It seems now with the rebates rising to the amount they are, they can get installation and planning and financial advice on how to do that and stop burning fossil fuels. So I would encourage that somehow come up with a robust outreach program to make sure that those members of our community are able to take advantage of this really great program. Thank you very much.
Jean Wu, go ahead.
Unmute. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I guess to follow up on Nick's talk about the outreach, one really good place to work with would be the senior center, because a lot of seniors do spend time and go to events at the senior center. I'm here because I'm really concerned that we have not got a resiliency hub, and there is potentially a funding source for resiliency hub from Ava Clean Energy or Community Energy, which I've been talking to various people about, and I'm hoping that the Climate Action Committee puts this on your agenda and moves it forward, because I think that looking for funding and getting the funding will not be that difficult. I've checked in and they agree that we would be eligible for funding under the AVA Community Energy RFP that they're working on now. So anything that you could do to help move that along would be very appreciated, because we really need to do something now and not after disaster strikes. The other topic that came up was something that I saw because it's something they did in Oak Park. Oak Park is a suburb of Chicago, and my sister lives in Oak Park. So I was looking to see what they're doing in Oak Park, and they have something called Volt Post. They've just put in their first charger. It actually just puts the chargers into the streetlights. It doesn't cost the city anything. It's all paid for by Volt Post and by the charging. And it would be a fairly interesting and novel way of getting outdoor charging for people who don't have the ability to do charging in their multifamily or multi-tenant homes or wherever they are, that they don't have the wherewithal to put in the fancy new 200 amp main that's being recommended for this sort of thing. So having several of those in the city would be great, especially since they don't seem to cost anything for the city. It's all being covered by Volt Post. And I believe Michelle knows about them, so it would be great to hear more about that and to have the Transportation Committee take that up as maybe part of the transportation efforts that are going on Solano. Thank you so much.
Cindy Young, go ahead.
Hello, committee members. Good evening. I had a couple of comments that I wanted to make. First of all, the East Bay Green Home Tour happened the week Saturday before last, and my home was on the tour. And I'm happy to say we had many, many visitors. I think it was about 60 or 70 people came through, including many Albany residents. And it was really inspiring to see how many of our Albany residents are really interested in home electrification, and many in the process or wanting to start the process. And I was wondering on that subject if there is, this is a question more than a comment, but I'm wondering if there is any update on the all-electric neighborhood, if Michelle has any more information. Nick Peterson and I met with the consultant in April, and at that time, I guess 3 neighborhoods had been identified, but I had heard from someone that the block had been narrowed down to 1 now. So I just wanted to see, Michelle, if you have any update that you can provide us on that. And my question also is, where is, I know the Department of Energy grant is to identify a block that would be willing to electrify. What is the plan on where the funding for the installation? Is that something to be determined later once we find a block that is interested? And lastly, to elaborate on and support Nick's comment about focusing on our low-income residents. I understand we've got about 700, my recollection's right, CARE or FARA households in Albany. And there are, as Nick pointed out, many programs for low-income folks that I don't think there's a lot of outreach on. The California Public Utilities Commission, they recently introduced a $280 million program to assist low-income households in installing solar and battery storage. And I'm just wondering if there's, and as we push or encourage homeowners to and renters to move from gas to electrification, one of the big barriers is the high cost of electricity. So a free solar and battery would be a huge assistance in encouraging homeowners to transition. So I'm wondering if there's any way that the city can get the CARE and FARA households and do outreach to those homes. Thank you.
No other public comment.
All right. With that, we'll move, I see there's no presentations as well. We'll move on to our additional action items. From what I understand tonight, we will not be going over item 5.1, the tri-transit proposal. We'll go over that once Katie is back. So we'll move on to our next item, 5.2, on the heat pump rebate program proposal.
Okay. So I have some slides here, and similar to last month, I'll kind of talk through this proposal a bit and then hand it off to the subcommittee members to add anything that they like. Oh, I didn't share my screen, did I? Sorry, 1 second. You'd think that I've done this enough times, I would have gotten it by now. Okay, so as you all, well, as 3 of you might remember, we discussed this last month. So I'll review a little of it for Dan and Mark, who weren't here. But we talked through some of the different elements of a proposal to change the heat pump rebate program, kind of walked through some of the outstanding questions, and then I and the subcommittee members met again this past month and kind of talked through it more, did some more analysis, and the subcommittee now has an actual kind of fully baked proposal for the committee. So that's what we'll be talking through tonight. This background you have all seen a few times, I think, but just some timeline. The program was created back in March of 2022, so it's been in place for over 3 years now. Well, actually, it launched in June, so exactly 3 years that it's actually been running. In February of 2023, we created the moderate income level and also got additional funding for the program. And then in February of 2024, we again changed the program to increase the low and moderate income level rebates. So we've kind of had, you know, kind of annual changes over the past few years. This is the program as it stands right now. So we have 3 income levels: standard, which is for anyone, moderate income, and low income. And for ducted heat pumps, the amounts are 1,000, 3,000, 6,000. Ductless is 500, 1,000, 1,500. And then there's a bonus for an electrical panel upgrade if it's going along with a heat pump for 500, 1,000, or 2,000. And the eligibility is extremely broad. Any building in Albany, just up to 1 rebate per housing unit. Any contractor doesn't have to be, you know, specially certified or anything like that. They just have to receive the building permit like any normal project and get their building inspection, basically, and just apply within 4 months of receiving that permit. So I'm going to walk through each of the kind of major changes that the subcommittee is proposing here. And this is really the biggest, most important one, I think, which is the creation of new water heater rebates, heat pump water heater rebates. So this would follow the same kind of standard, moderate, and low income 3-level structure that we have. And the amounts would be 500, 1,500, and 3,000. This kind of mirrors the same kind of scale that we have currently for our ducted heat pump rebates, which seems to be working pretty well. So that's the first recommendation. The reasoning behind this, we went into a bit more detail last month, and we also talked about it, I think, in November, December of last year, how heat pump water heaters really have been lagging behind heat pump HVAC systems in terms of popularity. We've seen really pretty amazing growth in the popularity of heat pump HVACs and water heaters. You know, they're up to 42% of our permits, probably 10 to 20% of actual projects when you think about the ones that aren't getting permitted. You know, they're just really not catching up very well. And so it seems like there's some extra help that's needed there. And when we originally launched the program, there were a lot more rebates for water heaters available, and that's since changed. There's not nearly as much out there right now. And we've also seen just in our data that water heaters are pretty sensitive to rebates because I think the cost is lower and the incremental cost is lower. Those rebates can really kind of make a big difference for people. And so we see spikes when incentives become available. So that's kind of the reasoning behind this. Again, this is sort of the big change. And then another change, a recommendation would be to end the standard income level HVAC rebate. So that's the $1,000 for ducted or $500 for ductless. And we would have like a 2 to 3 month transition period. And it wouldn't affect anyone who's already reserved their rebate, that they've already been told they're gonna get it. But we'd essentially be sunsetting that. So people who have a moderate income household or low income household, they could still get rebates for HVAC, but getting rid of the rebate for anyone who doesn't fall into those income categories. The reasoning for this one, sort of similar to the reasoning for the water heater in general, is that heat pumps have become way more common. And I think that this rebate has helped make that happen, but also as it's been effective, it has less and less impact over time. And we're starting to see more and more people who are getting heat pump HVAC systems and not even applying for the rebate. That they were going to do it anyways. Maybe they don't even know about the rebate. They're going to get a heat pump. Maybe the $1,000 just isn't enough of a percentage of the total cost that it really matters to them. You know, I think it is still impactful for some people, but it seems like it's starting to, you know, when you're weighing it against the water heaters, seems like it's less important. And sunsetting this rebate allows us to add the water heaters without needing to ask for extra money in the budget or to limit the rebate availability. So that's sort of the trade-off there. And finally, ductless HVAC rebates. So the standard income rebate would be sunset for ductless as well as ducted. But for those existing moderate and low income rebates, there's sort of two suggested changes here. First is to increase the rebate for low income up from $1,500 to $2,000. That just sort of gets it in line with the sort of ratios we've been using. The fact that it was at $1,500, it just kind of didn't get changed earlier when it probably should have. So it kind of gets it into line with what all of our other amounts are doing. And then providing additional funds for projects that are getting 2 or 3 ductless units. So we're seeing more and more projects where they're installing maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 ductless heat pump units instead of one big ducted heat pump unit. And it just happens to be that for some types of homes, for some situations, that model just makes more sense, just based on the way that the home is laid out. And it can make the project affordable and possible for a home, but when you have 2 or 3 or 4 units, those costs do add up. We end up at about $7,500 per heat pump unit that's going in there, so it starts to get closer to the cost of a ducted unit. And that sort of leaves this gap where we said, oh, well, the ducted rebates will be higher because they're more expensive, but then we have this type of project that is becoming more common that's sort of not really catered to. So this would kind of fill that gap by offering, for moderate income, you get $1,000 for 1 ductless unit, $2,000 for 2, $3,000 for 3. And then for low income, similarly, 2,000, 4,000, and 6,000. We would cap it at that third unit, mostly just to avoid complexity. And, you know, you see over time as you get larger and larger units, the costs do go up, but there's a certain amount of shared costs there. And it seemed kind of like a nice middle ground where it's not getting too crazy and complicated, but we are kind of filling the gap still. So that's the recommendation for ductless HVAC rebates. I didn't add the panel upgrades on here because there aren't any recommended changes to that, just that it would also apply to the heat pump water heaters. Like any heat pump installation, you would be able to get that panel bonus for. This here has the summary of the changes. So all of the changed things are in red here. So you can see we've crossed out the standard rebate for heat pump HVAC systems, increased the low income ductless to 2,000, and then added these second and third unit amounts, and then added the heat pump water heater category down here. So those are the changes. I can bring this slide back up if we want to look at it later. And then in terms of budget, I spoke about this a bit last time, but basically the way that we're budgeting this program now is that the budget is within our community development department budget, and we have around $60,000 a year set aside for the program. The reason that that's a little bit approximate is because it's not a line item in our budget. There is some flexibility there. So we could provide a little bit more funding if there are places where we haven't spent as much money, or if there are other big costs that come up, we might end up spending a little bit less on the program, or depending on how many people apply. So it is a little bit flexible, but that's sort of the number that we're aiming for when we're trying to design the program. And based on my estimates of how many rebate applications we're likely to get, based on, you know, both previous data and the growth that we're hoping to see, we think that these proposed changes will keep us within that program budget, or at least pretty close to it, and that'll stop us from needing to pause the program at the end of the year or, you know, limit it in some way. So those are the proposals from the subcommittee. I'll hand it over to them to add anything that they would like to.
Yeah, just to summarize, I think the main things to think about are, do we want to go back to council for budget and have a double or nothing kind of scenario where we get more budget and fund everything, or could we get nothing if they just say no? Which is kind of stopping and starting rebates, which is not ideal for the rebates, but has the possibility of getting more money for everything. Or do we remove some of the high income, aka standard rebates, and then be able to fund the water heater rebates with the existing budget without having to go back to council for more funding? So it's kind of a, do you want to take the chance asking for money and trying to get more, which is possible, or do you want to keep it more consistent and move the budget around to prioritize behavior change in a new area?
Yep, and I can add a little more details on some of the numbers we got there for the recommended water heater amounts. From some of the data Michelle was pulling up from Albany permits, where they're submitting costs, as well as some California-wide data, pretty large variance on, you know, the kind of hurdle of kind of gas water heater versus heat pump water heater. Somewhere within, you know, fairly even, or maybe $500 difference. Others we're seeing, you know, upwards of $6,000 difference. So kind of that standard one we went with was $500. On some projects, it might be enough to move the needle. On others, it probably won't. But we kind of figured that we would, I guess, also not running out of funds is important. And, you know, if we make a big splash marketing this at first, we might get a lot of people excited applying, and even just the act of, you know, getting the rebate might be, you know, a good a little nudge enough to go for it. So yeah, we went a little conservative there on maybe the standard amount. But I think we can also monitor how well the program's doing, and if we feel like we're still in budget, you know, if we want to move any of those amounts up or down after some months.
Any questions?
I feel like I ask this question every time, so please forgive me if I'm being redundant, but how do you determine income? Or do you
Yeah.
verify it, or is it self-reported?
Yeah, we do verify it. We use the most recent tax return, and the number that we use is based on the Housing and Urban Development Department's. They have kind of scales for area median income, so it's based on the sort of East Bay area, and there's numbers of income maximums based on household size. So there's kind of a chart, and then when people self-report that they fit into one of those categories, they send us their tax return so we can verify it.
Wait, so when they file, they send you tax return data? You don't access tax return data somewhere else? I just don't understand how.
Yeah, they send it to us.
They send it to you? Wow, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So technically they could commit fraud and send us something false, but we're not too worried about
That's
that.
all right. I just didn't know cities wanted to, since it's PII or whatever, I didn't know you wanted to receive that info.
Yeah, we do it. So there's a few other things that we do that for. So.
I had a question. How do the annual carbon emission reductions from a typical heat pump water heater compare to those from a typical ducted system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually meant to pull up some more specific numbers on this, but based on what I've read, they're pretty close. Heat pump HVAC systems are generally more, the heat pump is more GHG reductions, right? But depending on where you live and your household and stuff, it can vary. Here in Albany, where we don't need a ton of AC or heating, it's closer to even. So I think they're pretty comparable. I don't think we're taking a big GHG hit by focusing on water heaters. In particular, when you look at the sort of popularity of heat pump HVAC systems versus water heaters, I think there's more of a benefit to be gained from that perspective.
Yeah, because the benefit of heat pump HVAC is you get cooling, which is nice as the weather gets warmer. Tonight's a pretty warm day as well. The heat pump water heater versus gas, hot water is hot water. So people want hot water, and they don't see the difference unless there's an incentive to change as much.
Other questions?
All right, I guess we'll move to public comment on this item.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
And Nick, please speak up. I couldn't hear you last time.
Okay, well, hopefully you're able to hear me a little better now. Yeah, thank you. This is a great program. Accolades to Michelle for really thinking this through and making the necessary modifications. I concur with what she's saying. I think this has been very carefully vetted, and these changes are definitely worth it. The one thing I would kind of add into this is again, this more aggressive kind of outreach to get to the low income and middle income folks, to make sure that they're benefiting from this program, and we're really getting those people's gas consumption down. Again, if there's some budget within the rebate budget to do the outreach, that would be great. This kind of brings up a larger issue too. I know you were saying that this is now just a general fund for community development as a line item, which kind of takes it a little bit away from the Measure DD funds, although Measure DD funds are general funds. You understand that. But I think that it'd still be beneficial to see how much is coming in from Measure DD and how much is going out and what it's being used on. I know across the whole city, there are other initiatives going on. I know Public Works now has a wonderful new electric riding mower that I just saw in Terrace Park the other day. Much quieter than the old gas one, and of course no emissions. And I'd be curious to know, was that Measure DD funds, or is that being tracked? So again, I think this is the most successful program. It seems that Measure DD funds have funded and certainly has used a lot of funds, but it'd be interesting to know how much is coming in and what it's being used for. I think that would make people very happy to see how that particular tax is being used. The other thing was there was some talk of maybe trying to tweak that where it goes up higher on gas, not so much on and less on electricity, seeing as electricity is so expensive, and trying to encourage that. If we go for a measure that does that, it'd be good to have the information of how successful the Measure DD funds have been in addressing reduction in greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Jean, we'll go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Could you put up the slide about the summary, like how much for each thing again?
Yeah,
Maybe.
just one moment.
Thanks. I think it's the number 7. Yeah. So I'm thinking the standard rebate for the heat pump water heater should be $1,000, and the moderate income should be $2,000 if you really want to jumpstart the program, because most people don't even think about putting in a heat pump water heater when their water heater goes out. They just automatically put in the gas. And I'm not thinking that $500 is going to make that big a difference to them. But if you make it $1,000, they'll be much more hesitant and start thinking seriously about the heat pump water heater. The actual amount of money that you save with a heat pump water heater is significant. But usually telling people they're going to save by spending more doesn't work. If you save by saving, then they're more likely, I think, to pick up on this, and it might be easier to get more adherence to the heat pump water heater. One of the most important things about the heat pump water heater is the fact that it is possible to daisy chain them in something like a VPP program, and they've been successful in Hawaii with heat pump water heaters because everybody has one. And so they really save a lot of power overall for the Hawaiian grid that way. And that would be something that we should be looking into as well. So thank you very much. That's my suggestion.
No other public comment.
Question for staff is, if we take the suggestion from Jean on doubling the standard rebate for the heat pump water heater from 500 to 1,000, what impact does that have on the budget in terms of feasibility for making it doable within the current budget, that natural additional budget from council?
I think it does get into a little bit of a danger zone that we might run low on funds. Obviously, it depends on how many applicants we get, which, we can only guesstimate that. It's a little bit tricky because the higher the amount, the more applicants we're likely to get. So, but yeah, I think there's a possibility if we do that we might get to the end of the fiscal year and tell people, sorry, we're out of money, you have to go on the wait list, and or that we might have to turn people away. It's not the end of the world, some programs do that. Wait lists happen, but if we're trying to make sure that everyone that wants one can get one, and we want to fund as many projects as possible, starting with 500 might be better. And if we feel like we're not getting a lot of people coming in and asking for the rebate, then maybe we boost it up at that point. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of a judgment call. We can't tell the future. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer.
My very limited experience is that heat pump water heaters don't typically require electric panel upgrades. So I wonder if we could change the 500 to 0 for the standard rebate and then change the 500 to 1,000 for the water heater as commenter suggested.
Sorry, could you just, so change the
Get rid of, zero out the
electrical
rebate for
panel?
the electric panel upgrade for the standard rebate
I see,
and double the amount for the heat pump water heater.
I see.
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with this, but the few cases I know of, a heat pump water heater did not need an electric panel upgrade.
I had to spend $900 on electrical work when I got mine installed. So I know that's just a test case of one, but could have used that $500.
Yeah.
Those cases aren't much higher than one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know that it definitely can trigger a panel upgrade. I don't know that it's more like I think heat pumps are probably more likely to trigger it, but you know, they're taking a lot of energy. So, but that said, if we wanted to emphasize or kind of put more priority on the water heater, we still could do your suggestion, but. Yeah.
Technical note here, standard heat pump water heaters are 240 volts, and there are 120 volt lower juice options out there. They're not as established as the 240 volt options, but even if you don't need to upsize your panel, you may need to run additional wiring, and copper costs money. So I didn't have to change my panel from 100 to 200 amps, but the key thing is adding more wiring was the expense, not just separate from the panel piece.
So does running a 200, well, I would say 220 volt circuit constitute an electric panel upgrade?
No. That cost for the circuit would be included in the price of the heat pump installation, so that would be covered by the base rebate. But in order to get the upgrade, the panel upgrade rebate, you'd actually have to switch out the full panel from, say, 100 amps to 200.
Yeah, and my sense is that the power requirement for the heat pump water heater, the instantaneous power is not that great. It takes a small amount of power for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair enough point, and like Catherine said, there are 120 volt models on the market. We are trying to encourage people to not upgrade if they don't need to. The reason we put the panel upgrade bonus in place was because we didn't want it to be a barrier. But, I think you could certainly make the argument that if we really want to make sure we have $1,000 for the water heater rebate, maybe we want to take it from that panel upgrade and see what that does. You could do it, and that might be the right call. Again, it's kind of a judgment call for the committee, but.
And aside from what I was just saying, I think you did a really nice job here, the subcommittee and the staff. Thank you.
But to summarize, I'm seeing three options here. There's kind of the changes proposed here, which is the stay within the current budget model. There's the option that's not mentioned on the slide, which is the ask for more money and keep the standard rebate option, as well as adding the water heater one. And then option 3 is people are suggesting moving the panel upgrade rebates in order to increase the standard heat pump water heater rebates to 1,000 from 1,500. So it's current budget, more budget, or switch is how I think about that.
Rest of the committee have any opinions on that?
I have a separate question, so we can resolve this.
What's your question?
It's really a Michelle question, but it gets back to what Nick Peterson was asking about now and in the initial public comment about targeting low and middle income customers with marketing. Does the city have a way of identifying low and middle income households?
Not a good one. We have done outreach, I think maybe it's Jean Wu that suggested at the senior center. We have done outreach at the senior center, and we have worked a bit with our, like the Albany Cares staff, basically folks who are interacting with people who are more likely to be low income, but we don't have like a list or something. So we have done some of that. We definitely could do more. It's been a little while since we did another low income push. Yeah, any other ideas about reaching low income folks are welcome, but
I was struggling with that. That's what I
Yeah.
was asking. I'm like, I don't know how you would do that.
yeah, just try to find populations where maybe we have higher percentages. And then, you know, obviously there's the general outreach, but.
Maybe one more question here. If we did want to change the amount later, does that require another approval from City Council?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess one thing I will mention, I think when we were looking at these amounts, we were looking at, I think we did also forecast how many people we thought would be getting an electric panel upgrade, and it definitely wasn't a one-to-one with the heat pump water heater, so I think there is some risk that if we did kind of a folding that into the rebate amount, we still might go past our budget target here.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You know, it would help kind of conserve some of the money, but it wouldn't necessarily be like a one-for-one switch. Yeah.
I guess for me personally, I think keeping this like a consistently available rebate is important, just given how many others have been boom and bust, and you know, support at the federal level might, you know, is at risk as well. So I'm inclined to be a little conservative, see how it goes, and then potentially boost after that. Yeah, and I also. Yeah, it seemed like from what we talked about last time, there was a lot of effort putting it into balancing the budget, so it's definitely might be an uphill battle to ask for more funds at this point. I think I might be personally partial to like what we've proposed here, but also I want to hear if there's any other strong opinions either way.
Senator from Davia, so I can hear what your thoughts on this as well.
I was thinking out of your three options. I agree with him. I really like this plan, and it looks good as far as keeping this and keeping it within our budget without asking for more, like he was saying.
If there's no more discussion or different opinions, someone could make a motion. We had some motion language drafted up that I can put on the screen if folks are feeling so inclined. Oh, sorry, I have to reshare it. That's the recommended motion.
All right, well, I'd like to then make a motion that we recommend that the council update the program to include rebates for heat pump water heaters and the standard rebate for heat pump HVAC systems, and provide additional funds for multi-unit ductless installations.
Second.
Member Pierce?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Hodges.
Yes.
Excellent.
Sure, yeah, we could take our break a little early and then come back for the last one. All right, we will reconvene in 5 minutes from now at 7:52. And we're back. We're going to move on to item number 5.3 to talk about the street tree management plan.
Yes. going to share my screen. Okie dokie. So before we dive in, this presentation was originally created by Ryan Suttle, one of the consultants working with the city on the street tree management plan. I'm using his formatting and most of his presentation to try and give you guys the most accurate presentation of the changes that we've made to the plan since our last meeting in April. That being said, I am not an expert or an arborist, so the highly technical comments or questions I will happily pass along, but I'll do what I can to answer what I do know about it. So for starting at the beginning, this is a plan that the city has been developing for a few years. The first phases being the inventory of what we have today in Albany, which was completed in 2023 and is available on our webpage. Currently, we're in the final stages of the second phase, which is to prepare the plan. This would be a guiding policy document for us to improve the management of our street trees, to expand the canopy, and improve the health of the community, amongst a number of other considerations. The purpose of this specific agenda item is to offer you a brief overview of the changes that have been made since our last presentation. We've gone through chapter by chapter in a number of calls and meetings. Yeah, so now we have a draft plan, essentially, and we're hoping to get some additional detailed comments from you. We did just present this version of the plan to the Parks, Rec, and Open Space Commission last week, and got some good comments from them. And yeah, so hoping to keep the momentum going and reach the third phase of the plan, which would be the actual implementation of it. So since the last meeting where we discussed the plan, we've worked with the consultants to review and revise recommendations and work on some of the budget projections based on some of the recommendations to get an idea of what it would actually take to implement the plan. We also were very pleased with the turnout and the effectiveness of our tabling at the Albany Citywide Planning Expo in May, where we had the opportunity to listen to community members for around 2 hours. Some highlights of this experience included setting more aspirational goals with native species and clarifying maintenance methods. So to begin our brief overview, we'll be looking at chapters 1 through 4 and chapter 6. Chapter 5 covers community perspectives, and that includes events like the Citywide Planning Expo, as well as tonight's committee meeting. So that can't really be concluded until we finish it all. So with that as well, we did a majority of chapter 6, the elements in that we went over last meeting. So to try to keep it under an hour-long presentation, I'm mainly just going to highlight the changes that have been made so that we're all on the same page of specifically what we've done to incorporate feedback that we received from you as well as community members. So as a brief refresher, Chapter 1 addresses introducing the plan and the context for it. 2 is about the City of Albany. 3 looks into the urban forest inventory that started in 2020. And 4 is the current tree management and protections in the city. So to begin with Chapter 1, the introduction and context. We talk about ecosystem services like cooling, shade, filtering air, and a number of others, social sustainability concepts like beautification and placemaking, as well as elements such as increased walkability, which influences business revenue, which ties into economic sustainability, improved revenue for nearby businesses, increased home values, and reduced costs associated with heating and cooling. Each of these elements are to be shaped by equity, specifically emphasizing that the benefits of the trees are to be distributed equitably across Albany. When asking why we're doing a street tree management plan versus a master plan, we look back at the CAP, Climate Action Adaptation Plan, which calls for an overarching urban forestry plan, which would concern trees besides just street trees. This plan specifically is just for street trees, and it's sort of a good starting point where we're able to sort of tweak some existing policies and set the baseline where then we can take a step back and build out that master plan. So this is a really good first step in the development of the master plan that the CAP calls for. So this is the broad project timeline. The very first step came from the creation of the city's CAP, followed then by the partnership of the city with the Hort Bartlett Science consultants. From there, we reviewed the current policy and procedures, including the CAP and the general plan. This was followed by reviewing the tree canopy and inventory analysis, so looking at both individual trees as well as canopy demographics across the city. This was shaped more deliberately by community outreach and engagement, which is a constant element of the plan. And then finally, the plan development, which is what is culminating in this presentation. So, sorry. Looking back at chapter 2, in the city we have 14 neighborhoods that we looked at, obviously largely developed and residential. It's a difficult place to be a street tree, which means that there is a need for some nuanced management and some very specific goal setting. This chapter also included ensuring that we were connecting with other city planning documents, including the 2035 general plan and the CAP. Moving to chapter 3, we take a deeper dive into the trees, including canopy cover assessment, inventory analysis, and ecosystem service analysis. We used iTree Canopy, which is a partnership between Arbor Day Foundation and the U.S. Forest Service to estimate canopy coverage in the city. On the whole, around 90% of an aerial view of the city is covered by trees. These are not all street trees, which actually only make up about 1/5 of that coverage. When we look at estimated benefits and what these trees actually do for the city, this table shows the air pollution estimates for the city. The main takeaway here is that about $53,000 a year, nearly $54,000 are estimated benefits delivered to the city by street trees alone. And that's with that small proportion of land coverage that we saw from the iTree Canopy assessment. So, and I can hold off on that slide for a sec if you want to look at it a little bit longer. This one. All right. The inventory itself had some really encouraging takeaways. Most trees were in good condition. Fair condition trees, which are trees that have moderate defects, specifically things that can be managed over time, were less frequently found, and even less so were poor condition trees or dead trees. This is a really good starting point because it shows that the current trees are performing a lot of ecosystem service delivery, and it shows that they're likely to continue providing those benefits over a significant period of time. Here, we've seen this before, but this is the table of the 15 most common species of trees in Albany. A lot of these are common to the Bay Area landscapes. Important to note here is the color coding, which shows whether a tree will be small, medium, or large in size when at maturity. So you can see most of these trees on this chart, when they're at a mature age, they're small sized. There are a few that are large, few that are medium, but predominantly in this area, they're small trees. So that's important because a lot of room along Albany's streets is constrained by narrow sidewalks and utility obstacles. And so these small trees are great for small spaces, but at the same time, we need to be focusing on those few large and medium tree species that are common and planting them where we can to maximize the benefits that the trees can provide over time. Among the 15 most common species, none of them were native to California, and thus not the Albany area. So we've looked at the inventory and saw how many were and were not native to California as a whole, and how many are native to the Albany area, how many California natives are also native to the Albany area. Granted, in the state of California, with the wide variety of biomes, that it made more sense to focus on trees that would reasonably be growing in Albany's historic habitat and in the hills nearby. So about 2% of the trees in this inventory are considered Albany natives. That being said, some of these would not be appropriate for street planting, like the coast redwood, which is one of, if not the largest tree species in the world. So yeah, just a consideration. Swapping over to look at the management of trees, we look at how trees are maintained under the city's current reactive model and what that means, as well as a benchmarking and comparative analysis with nearby cities that are a similar size to Albany in the Bay Area. So Albany has a shared maintenance agreement, which means that the adjacent property owner is responsible for managing that tree. Albany will plant trees on request, and Albany does prune trees, but only on a reactive basis. So if something happens that warrants pruning or handling the tree, then Albany will come out and deal with it. The other option for a maintenance plan is a proactive model, which basically means that the city maintains trees using some kind of system to try and prevent those concerns. We've looked at what is called a grid plan, where the city would be divided into grids, and the trees would be assessed on a set schedule in order to try and handle any concerning issues far ahead of when they become a danger or a serious concern that would require then that reactive model. So one important consideration here is that the reactive management plan costs a lot more than the proactive. Generally, this table just basically shows by unit cost. The reactive model costs a significant amount more. Yeah. Okay. This is where we jump into Chapter 6. These are our overarching objectives. I presume that we're all still somewhat familiar with this hefty table. So I'm not going to go piece by piece into this one like we did last meeting. As opposed, we're just going to look specifically at the things that have changed. So in Goal 1, to grow a healthy, extensive, vibrant, and diverse street tree population to provide 5% canopy cover by 2050. So we're looking at a 25% increase from the current 4% canopy coverage that gets explored in Chapter 3. It sounds low, but it is significant considering the number of restrictions in planting street trees in Albany. As part of this, thanks to the feedback that we've gotten from the from the committee, as well as from the Citywide Planning Expo with community members, we have made it clear that we're prioritizing Albany natives as much as possible in that species selection process. It is a really important consideration, and so we're making it very clear within this goal that is a consideration. Also thinking about how climate-adapted species, how to maximize canopy coverage based on each site while considering the use of climate-adapted species. Another change that we've seen since the last meeting has to do with Action 1, which is develop a citywide street tree planting strategy to increase canopy cover and improve equity between neighborhoods. At the time of our last meeting, one of the key points here, our set goal was to plant at least 150 street trees per year. That has been increased to 170 in order to try and achieve that planting goal overall more consistently, as well as incorporating all of the other considerations of the turnover of trees, considering the current age of presumed trees and potential removals that have come into play. So just sort of adding more of a buffer to ensure that we're able to be on track with the goals that we're setting forth in this pretty extensive plan. This slide just highlights explicitly who would be responsible for handling tree removal based on each type of criteria. This format is more in line with the systems used by other cities, and I know that we talked a lot about who would be in charge of what as we were going through this portion of the plan. So this is just to make it a little bit clearer exactly what the plan lays out in terms of who the responsibility falls on for different situations. And I do believe actually, oh, yes. So when we presented this to pros last week, these were 3 questions that came up that were particularly interesting. The 3 main questions that we spent a lot of time, or the consultant and Jeff and Mark spent a lot of time, and John, answering. So I thought it was important that you saw them in case you were having similar thoughts. The first was how many of the native street trees are indigenous versus planted? So how many of the street trees that we currently have in Albany, even if they are a native species, have they been there the whole time, or did we plant them ourselves? The answer to that is that, especially considering that they're street trees, all of them have been planted. None of them have grown themselves. So just a factor that I thought was interesting, that I thought might be a good question to remind everyone of. With that as well, in the plan it says that the removal of invasive trees is not a priority. The reason for that is mainly because of the extremely low number of invasive trees that are found along streets. And specifically, if they are a street tree, then they're not a major risk of invading other spaces. And that's according to our consultants and their extensive expert knowledge. So I'm quoting them on that. And then finally, how do we encourage plantings to be most suitable for the strip? So when it comes to elements such as what we were talking about of maximizing canopy coverage for the planting strips based on the size of them, or figuring out which of those mature species would fit best in certain areas. Something that the consultants brought up during this presentation to pros was that what a lot of cities do right now is they come up with a more specialized species selection list of trees after seeing the available planting strip that then the homeowner can choose from, so that way there's a positive influence making sure that we're maximizing the use of that planting strip while also still providing that choice to homeowners. And I believe that just brings me to next steps. So yeah, looking to get some additional feedback today, see if anything has stood out to you upon review of the plan, as well as this very brief presentation of changes, and then potentially recommending it to City Council. So yes, thank you. Any questions to start out?
I had a question. You mentioned that the homeowner could choose from the tree. Does that mean that you would need the homeowner's consent for them, or for the city to be able to plant the tree in front of their house?
Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding the question, but so upon the street planting strip being approved for planting, they would get a list of trees to choose from that then they would get to choose from essentially if they wanted to, or the city could just take. Like if the homeowner said, I just want a tree here, then the city could just sort of choose for them and use that, is my understanding. Oh, are you asking if they can veto a tree planting?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's an excellent question that I don't have the answer to. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sure it's answered in the plan at some point.
I also don't know the answer. My thought, technically that land is city-owned land, so we should, I don't think an owner can have veto power there, but also, the ones that want trees are much more likely to get them sooner, so there's that. But yeah, we can check to make sure. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that, or is it questions only? Yeah, so I don't know the exact answer, but as a homeowner who has two trees I got from this program, I requested 3 different species, and I got 1 species because either availability or recommendations, or you can request something, but you may not get what you request. So that's the homeowner experience of that, and that's probably based on the arborist's experience and expertise on that.
I noticed there's one tree rated as excellent of all the trees, and I want to know where that tree is.
Well, we talked about it in our meeting this last week, and I'll have to look, when I get my notebook, at the end of this meeting, I can let you know.
It must be your top priority going out of this meeting.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you. I need to know.
And some trees were considered dead and some were labeled as stump.
Yes, yeah. And with those trees specifically, they're a small number, but those are included in the, those were removed from the canopy assessment in, reflection of the inventory, yeah.
Actually, I have a serious question. Has the Bay Area Air Quality Management District ever been asked to weigh in on this? Because the emissions of volatile organic compounds from different species of trees vary over a real substantial range.
Not to my knowledge. That's something that I can...
Add that then.
Yeah, I will follow up with that. Thank you.
All right, not seeing any more questions, we'll move over to public comment on this item.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this one.
Oh.
For the comment? Okay, never mind.
All good. Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this update on the tree management plan. I think that's really great. I just came back from 5 weeks in Europe, going through Italy, Spain, and Portugal. And I can tell you the street tree situation there is really amazing in general. I mean, it varies in various ways. One thing that really hit me, though, is you see a lot of use of London plane tree because it's such a durable species, and you can actually plant it in a relatively constrained space, which a lot of spaces in Europe are, and it provides a really excellent canopy. I know we want a diversity, we want some local ones. It seems like we should have some kind of plan of how the canopy comes about. And it's not all these little tiny trees that don't provide much shade at all. And that we learn from other places that do have substantial canopies. I mean, not to just take one tree and say we plant it all over, but that, there are some trees that are just going to fare much better in an urban environment and in the changing climate that we're up against. The other thing that was very noticeable in Europe is that most of their pavement, except for newer and highly trafficked roads, but within cities and older cities, are pavers or tiles that are permeable. So there's a lot more transfer of water through the paved areas into where the street roots are, and the tree roots are in the street trees. So I know there's been some suggestion of taking areas actually in the street where they're not big enough to park a car, and actually making tree wells for larger trees in those situations. And it would be interesting to pursue that a bit more. I think there are members of Albany Climate Action Coalition that have proposed plans on this. And it might be nice to find an agreeable street block that has a few of those locations and do a pilot project that puts in a more capable and dense and larger canopy kind of approach to putting in street trees. So I think there's some area for innovation here. I get a little worried when things get a little, here's the plan and it's all very technical, and you can only do this kind of tree in this kind of place, and there isn't much flexibility, and it seems like we would need that. Thank you.
Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. I did not have time to carefully go through the draft plan, but I did kind of peruse it. One thing I am happy to see is there is at least some reference and discussion of native trees, which was not present, I believe, in the old plan. So I see that as a big improvement, and I think that's the result of public input. I remember seeing a survey done from the public on what do they think is most important about trees. And I think the third or fourth most important factor that was cited was support of our struggling wildlife. And the support for native trees, as some of you, or maybe all of you know, is to address the biodiversity crisis. Our birds, our bees, our pollinators are in dire distress. We have the danger is die-off, and the best way to support them is through native trees. So I am happy to see this reference. I don't see, and maybe it's there and I just missed it, or maybe this is something that is going to come later, a list of approved street trees. Currently, there is only one coastal live oak is the only native tree to this area. I think there are a few other trees that are native to California on the list, but very, very sparse. So I hope that maybe that's already in and I just missed it, but maybe that's something to come later. I did want to comment, I saw a reference on page 19, a reference that the historical landscape of Albany was mostly grassland ecosystem. And I'm not an ecologist, but we do have a member of the Albany Climate Action Coalition who is an ecologist, Dan Johnson, and he has addressed this with us, that at the time that Albany was settled by the Europeans, it was indeed grassland, but Albany is in a shifting mosaic biome, and it shifts throughout history between grassland and forest. So I think that is an error on page 19. I see that often cited as a reason why we should ignore natives, because Albany was, quote, all in its native state, all grassland. But overall, I'm happy to see some priority and recognition of the importance of natives here. Thank you.
No other public comment.
All right, we can move on to discussion.
So I want to start by thanking the consultants and the city staff. This is a super thorough 100-plus page analysis, so thank you really for your hard work on this. It's really great to see the incorporation of community input, the increase in the number of goals for street trees from 150 to 170, attention to native tree analysis and biodiversity details. That's really helpful to have the info there. I think one of the challenges people have with street trees who are homeowners who are not ecologists is the problem with the shared maintenance issue of having to file a permit to have it pruning is a real pain. So shifting the responsibility from the homeowner to the city is a convenience for the homeowner. It's a good thing, and they recommend that. I like that. And that currently the city has the liability for maintenance, but they don't have the power to prune, which is annoying. So fixing that to be proactive maintenance, I think is a good point. And the question I have there is how much does it cost to the differential between the reactive and proactive plan? They talk about the current budget is 185, now it's going to be 200K, and then there's a 765K total for the whole plan they're recommending. I want to get clearer on the numbers there and like what the delta is from the current versus planned, getting crisper on that so we know what we're getting into with recommending the plan that they're suggesting and then where the budget money comes from. So I also want to think about, it's a broader picture, so we're talking a lot of technical details here about what fits in the well, and I want to expand how we're thinking about the problem. So rather than pick the tree to fit the well, why not remove pavement and expand tree wells to fit bigger trees? This is what Dan Johnson's proposed. He's an ag ecologist, and he is suggesting this program, what he calls Water Integrated Street Tree Expansion, which I also worked on a grant application with him on this separately from the CAC work, but he's proposing where there's areas where you can't have parking, why not put more plants there? This could be street trees, it could be other kinds of vegetation, but the idea of let's expand our definition of how we can reimagine street trees to not just be the whatever the minimum area is, particularly relevant to the discussion about how do you handle planting street trees where there's not a lot of sidewalk already. So there are some neighborhoods that don't have room for street trees because their sidewalk is narrow and there's no room for it. So how do we really reimagine our vision for that and what that could look like by removing pavement, improving permeability for water, removing runoff, better for pedestrian safety, and adding native species. Now, currently, I think there are 60-something native oaks here, and at 10% species diversity, that could be 440 more oaks, that's 10% of the total. So I think it's important to prioritize those, if not the valley oak or buckeye, which are mentioned as 3 species that are good for Albany. The climate-adapted SoCal species would be Catalina ironwood and island oak in terms of ideas for climate-adapted that are adjacent to us, not exactly local, but oaks are great for a lot of reasons, and I want to harp on this a little bit because they not only support the biodiverse ecosystems, because birds need 70% native to reproduce, and insects, there's hundreds and hundreds of insects that lay their eggs on native species, and you only get like 2 or 10 maybe species. Native species get hundreds of species that support versus non-natives only have a small handful they support. So the biodiverse support for non-natives I think is not really there as much. I want to push back on that in the report. Doug Tallamy has some resources on the East Green Home Tour website specifically to what you can look for prioritizing why natives matter. There's a whole chart on the exact number of species support per species of like insects and what they support per tree or per type of thing for inspiration. I appreciate their, also moving on to the private tree ordinance mentioned. It's not in, they mentioned there's a suggestion for having more private tree protections. Other cities do that as well. It's not part of the scope of the plan, but it's mentioned, and I appreciate the consultants for including the recommendation in there. If there's the Arbor Day idea, I think it's a cool idea, but given the limited budget, I think we should prioritize action over symbolic stuff. And if it takes money to do outreach and to prune trees, I would prioritize that over an Arbor Day event. If we had to pick and choose, Arbor Day is cool. We'd love to see that. But in terms of if there's had to pick one or the other, I'd pick action over symbols. So I have 4 questions. And I'm kind of talking a lot here, but I've read this thing. Can we get more details about, on page 36, why trees were called inadequate or inappropriate? So one, maybe the size, like redwoods, but like if there's more details on like why they were listed as inappropriate, that would be helpful. Details on, secondly, on the budget for proactive maintenance and like the delta between current and proposed. Thirdly, are there any diseases for coast live oaks that are near here? There's a presentation by Elizabeth Landham, who's an arborist at ACAC at the library last month, that she talked about why she didn't like coast live oak specifically. You can get into which species of oaks are better, you know, valley oak or coast live oak or island oak, et cetera. But she had some interesting statistics on the diseases relevant to these trees. So we don't want to be planting trees that have diseases, but the coast live oak is #1 locally for a lot of reasons. Also oaks are great, particularly the coast live oak, because they're super low water use. Like you don't need water in the summer at all, which is really great for a lot of reasons. 4th question, can we add more natives to the street tree list? As the public commenter noted, the street tree list currently does not call out the type of tree, but is it native or not? It's like 1 or 2 that they have like a little star on it, but having a separate column specifically and prioritizing adding those trees to the tree list, potentially adding that as an appendix to this already long document. Can we get more natives like specifically in the tree list, and having more info on that would be great. I said a lot, I know, so hope that's helpful.
Sorry, one sec. You know, that's all really, really incredible stuff. Most of that, I'll be honest, will likely just be a situation of me passing it on, especially when it comes to the budget between reactive and proactive models. The one thing that I know for sure is that proactive, it's the consistent, maintained cost of reactive model that we're on right now equates to a much significantly higher number than the proactive, which starts out higher and then becomes exponentially smaller. That's all I know about that one, sorry. In terms of the terminology of deeming certain trees inappropriate on page 36, I'm not quite sure. I'd need to ask them directly. I don't want to speak to their specific choices in that regard. I love your comment about the diseases for the coast live oak. I think it's a really important consideration. And then for the species tree list, I know that upon recommendation of the plan, the entirety of the tree list is getting reformatted, recreated, and all of that by a graphics designer working with the consultants in preparation to presenting to council. So hopefully that should take on, I know we've talked about making it clear which species are native on there. And so, yeah, that's still under development. Want to make sure that you know that that's still being altered in some way or other. But yeah, in regards to the other questions, I'm sorry, I don't know enough detail to give you a suitable answer.
Right, I'm not seeing any more comments. I think we're at the place where we would put forth a recommendation. Does anyone have a motion?
I'll just add before you do a motion. So our recommendation is for the city council to approve the plan subject to committee comments. So the way this kind of works is obviously it's not quite finished yet. We're still doing some editing and stuff. The other committees that look at this have some comments too, and some but not all of those end up getting incorporated into the plan that we bring to council. It's helpful in that process to have a sense of if the whole committee really wants this particular thing to get in there, if there's an edit that the committee really wants versus oh, this would be cool. Just a little bit of discussion about that. So, Member Bierce brought up a lot of questions and suggestions there. If there's anything that's like really ringing true, particularly for any other members, it'd be helpful to know that. Or if you're like, that all sounds great, or it looks great as it is, just so, you know, that sort of thing just helps us. And, you know, kind of as we go through that process of finalizing to bring it to the council. So I'll just add that if anyone has anything else to add, or go straight to a motion if you feel so inclined.
I know less about trees than even Benji, who stated that he doesn't know about trees. But I'm very intrigued with the idea that Catherine mentioned that I think Dan Johnson pitched about using space, reimagining space that is currently paved but not used for parking, for example, and having it be pervious and trees and that sort of whatever the best use case is. I find that to be something worth exploring.
Great.
I think it's a great plan and a great presentation, and I love the idea of prioritizing native plants to Albany and California.
In terms of edits, I guess to boil it down to three things. What I'd like to see different would be why trees are inappropriate in that list on page 36. Clarity on the budget for status quo versus recommendations, like maybe additional things they're talking about, like more planting or whatever the difference is, not just the pruning, but other things, like whatever the status quo versus recommendation and overall. And then I would like to see that the arborists also have a recommendation, or if they have any thoughts about the bioswale or the wise tree planters, the removed pavement that can't be used for parking, and expand that for trees. And if that changes any of your calculations around adding species or adding larger trees or more canopy cover, because that could be a really great way to get way more canopy cover way faster, and meeting these goals, you know, early even. And then the nice to have is the question about the live-oak diseases or pests. Like every tree has their different pests and whatnot, so if they want to have a footnote on that, that would be nice to know, but kind of more optional.
Okay. Also, not knowing that much about trees, I like the plan, and I also support those 3 edits brought forth by Catherine.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the second?
Sure. So 3 edits. One is about the trees.
It's okay. He can go back and watch it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We got it on video. We're good. That's why we record these things.
Yeah.
This would be a great time for a motion if someone feels so inclined.
I move that with those 3 edits that we approve the plan, or recommend the City Council approve, subject to committee comments, the draft version of this plan.
Second.
Member Bierce?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Rose Shears?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hodges?
Yes. All right, great. With that, we'll move on to if we have any subcommittee updates. I think we covered the heat pump rebate ones. I don't believe we have any transportation. Okay, well, that was easy. No updates this time. With that, we can move on to staff and committee member announcements.
Great. I don't have a lot in the way of announcements today, but one event that's coming up is the city's 4th of July celebration, which, if you'll believe it, is on July 4th. That's 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Memorial Park. It's super fun. And there is going to be valet bike parking, so I recommend that everyone walk or bike. Perfect. And Benji is also working to try and make sure that the foodware is as sustainable as we can manage. So we're doing our best. Food trucks are a little tricky, but we're doing our best on that. So that's my big announcement for today. Any other committee member announcements?
So August, I think 5th or 8th, there's a National Night Out is coming up in August, or for folks who want to promote climate-related topics or bring flyers or ideas for things to their community. You can submit an application to get a free block party permit, normally $80 or so, and you can get that for free that one day of the year.
I had two comments. You can tell me if they're the right sort of things for this, but one not so good, one good. In the LA Basin, the air quality staff down there proposed phasing out gas-fired water heaters and space heaters. The program was not as stringent as what the Bay Area District has actually adopted. And down there, it was voted down 7-5. I was surprised by that. That's on the downside. On the upside, I follow the electricity grid pretty carefully, and there's been, to me, amazing progress. Just the other day, I saw that the amount of power being drawn from grid-scale batteries was 11,000 megawatts at one particular time, which is, well, 5 times the capacity of the Diablo nuclear plant, and it was about a third of the total demand on the CAISO grid, which is like 85% of the total California grid. So it's improved hugely. Thank you.
Impressive. Great. At this point, we usually go to public comment for any comment on announcements or requests for future agenda items from the public. Then we'll come back to the committee for future agenda items. Does that sound good, Chair, Vice Chair? Okay.
Nick Peterson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my understanding we're getting a new community development director, and the announcement I saw from city manager indicated that they're very pro climate action plan, and it would be great to have them come and talk to the Climate Action Committee and the public at the Climate Action Committee about how they see increasing and really championing the climate action and adaptation plan and making sure that all city activities are viewed through the lens of climate action and reducing emissions. I think that would give us a good charge on how we're approaching the climate emergency declaration. The other thing I would like to see happen at a fairly soon Climate Action Committee meeting is an assessment of the Measure DD funds. It'd be great to see. I mean, this program has been running for a while now. I think we have 2 full years of funding coming in. So, suppose that's around the $600,000-700,000 range for the amount that would go to climate action and adaptation planning efforts, and then seeing what those efforts are and what it's funded, because I know they're across the city and not just related to the work that Michelle does specifically, but that Public Works has been doing things and probably Rec has been doing things. And the city has, I hear talk of putting in EV chargers finally and having an electric vehicle for the permit, the building inspector. So I know there's stuff that's funding. I think we need to get that out there and understood by the public so they really see that there's action happening. Thank you very much.
Cindy Young, please go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of things. I would love to have an update from Michelle or from someone on implementation efforts on the foodware ordinance. Thought it was great we got that passed last August, but I am not seeing that much compliance, and I realize that it's not going to be enforced until I believe it's August or September, but that's almost here. And I'm just wondering what is being done on that. And second, I want to echo again the need for public EV chargers. I was very glad to hear at last month's meeting that the Public Works has installed an EV charger for their new electric vehicle. That is certainly progress, but Albany has a grand total of one public EV charger, which is behind the Little Star, which I understand was out of service for quite some time. And it's a real problem, especially for people who live in apartment complexes and want to get an EV. I would also like the committee to explore moving up the dates for reaching our carbon reduction goals, because they are just no longer in line with the science. And a lot of other jurisdictions are responding to the recent science and moving up their dates, and I would like to see us move up our dates as well. I'd also echo Nick Peterson's request for some more information on our DD funds and how much has been spent, what we have. That's it. Thank you very much.
Jimu, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, so I realize that I said this already, but I still think that it's really important to add consideration for converting the Albany Community Center into a real resilience hub, including solar, batteries, induction stoves, heat pump and AC cooling center, and other things that are probably really important, but I'm not that familiar with, like ability to charge, EVs, that would be important, and the ability to provide additional food and services to people who could drive through or drive in and pick them up in case of an emergency, some kind of an evacuation center, potentially, and an internet reception with satellite ability, that might be important. So I just really feel that we've been many years without a major earthquake or disaster, but it could still happen. And getting started on this now would be the best way to get something done. Also, I agree that having more than one public EV charger in the city of Albany would be a big bonus for people who live in multifamily housing or who cannot add that to their homes because they're renters. So those are two really important things. And I appreciate greatly the idea that we're going to add street trees and hope that program works out well. Thank you.
No other public comment.
All right. Committee members, agenda items?
Yeah, a couple ideas. I want to echo what the public has mentioned about the Resilience Center and then the grant for the community center. Personal story, PG&E shut off my power recently for a day to update the electric pole in my neighborhood. So I had a family member with medical needs to have power for that, and it was a real project management opportunity to have to reroute my household members to another location that had power. And I consider the community center as an option, but it would be great if they had more resources there. I know that, for everybody we're out of power, and I wouldn't have to rely on a neighbor, but have a community center to be able to go to for my own needs and for other people who are in need and medical reasons or elderly and kids, et cetera. So that's top of mind. And then two other items on the private tree ordinance. It's mentioned as a recommendation in the tree management plan, but it does not cover private trees property like other cities do, Palo Alto, East Palo Alto, Berkeley, Oakland, et cetera. So would like to see more of that discussed. And then the community center, I don't know if this is separate from the resilience piece or electrification in general, but we're currently teaching people to cook on gas stoves in the cooking classes for the community, and induction stoves can be purchased for as cheaply as $100 for a portable one, and you don't have to have a whole giant capital plan necessarily. You can take a pilot approach with, a portable version and then a residential version, a commercial version later. So how do you do a minimum viable electrification ideas for the community center? I know that may be part of the different capital plans, but we'll see how can we get that sooner and maybe smaller pieces potentially.
I'll just second the resilience hub idea. I think we tend to talk more about the mitigation side. It would be interesting to focus some on the resilience. All right, seeing no other items, we will wrap it up tonight. Thank you all for being here.